Fight back, Marcus, unless you're exactly who everyone thinks you are. The words echoed across the crowded hallway of Lincoln Heights High School just seconds before the laughter started. Students lined both sides of the corridor, backpacks slung over their shoulders, phones glowing in their hands, conversations freezing as attention shifted toward one person. Marcus Johnson, 16 years old, straight A student, robotics club captain, the kid everyone called the black nerd. Marcus stood quietly near his locker, one hand gripping a stack of textbooks, the other adjusting the strap of his worn backpack. He had learned long ago that keeping his head down made life easier. Or at least that was what he told himself. Across from him stood Ethan Walker, the school's golden boy, star quarterback, honor roll student when it mattered, son of a successful real estate developer whose name seemed to appear on every new building in town. Wherever Ethan walked, people noticed. Wherever Marcus walked, people looked through him. Ethan leaned casually against a row of lockers, surrounded by teammates and admirers, wearing the relaxed confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Come on, Marcus," Ethan said loudly enough for half the hallway to hear. "You seriously carrying books during lunch again?" A few students laughed. Marcus lowered his eyes and kept moving. He had heard worse, much worse, but Ethan wasn't finished. He stepped sideways, blocking the path. The crowd sensed entertainment and grew larger. Whispers spread. A circle formed without anyone officially creating one. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes following every movement. The fluorescent lights overhead reflected off the polished floor, making the hallway feel brighter and somehow colder at the same time. "You know," Ethan continued with a grin, "if you spent half as much time in the gym as you do in the library, maybe people would actually remember your name." More laughter followed. Marcus remained silent. That was what surprised people most about him. No matter what happened, he rarely reacted. He never argued, never raised his voice, never tried to prove himself. To most students, that silence looked like weakness. To Marcus, it was control. He slowly bent down to pick up a notebook that had slipped from his stack. Inside the front cover, hidden from everyone around him, was a folded letter. Cream-colored paper. Official seal. National Karate Championship Invitational. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier. He hadn't told anyone. Not his teachers. Not his classmates. Not even most of his friends. The letter represented a part of his life he kept carefully buried beneath grades, science competitions, and quiet routines. Ethan noticed Marcus looking down and smirked. "See? That's exactly what I mean." The crowd laughed again. Marcus closed the notebook and slipped it back into his backpack. His expression never changed. But somewhere deep inside, something stirred. Because Ethan Walker had no idea who he was standing in front of. And before this story was over, neither would anyone else. The final bell echoed across Lincoln Heights High School, and within minutes the hallways emptied into streams of students heading toward buses, parking lots, and after-school activities. Marcus Johnson walked alone as usual, his backpack resting heavily on one shoulder. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and a cool breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the football field. Behind the thick lenses of his glasses, his eyes remained focused on the path ahead. Most students assumed they knew everything about him. They saw the quiet teenager who always sat in the front row, the student who volunteered answers in science class, the kid who spent lunch reading instead of socializing. What they did not see was everything that happened after school. 3 miles from campus, tucked between a hardware store and a family-owned diner, stood a modest karate academy with faded brick walls and a weathered sign that had survived more than 20 years of rain and summer heat. Marcus pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of polished wood and clean training mats immediately settled his mind. The noise of school seemed to disappear behind him. Here, nobody cared about popularity. Nobody cared about expensive clothes or social status. Here, discipline mattered. Respect mattered. Character mattered. At the far end of the training floor stood Sensei Daniel Brooks, a former national competitor whose calm presence commanded attention without ever demanding it. His silver hair reflected the warm overhead lights as he observed a group of younger students practicing footwork drills. When he noticed Marcus entering, a faint smile appeared on his face. "Rough day?" he asked. Marcus set down his backpack and nodded. "Nothing I cannot handle." Sensei Brooks studied him carefully. He had known Marcus for nearly a decade. long enough to recognize the difference between frustration and pain, long enough to understand when the boy was carrying more than he admitted. The world likes to judge people by what it sees first, the instructor said quietly. That has never been a reliable measurement of strength. Marcus glanced toward the trophy case lining one wall of the academy. Inside rested years of achievements. Regional titles, state championships, national qualifiers. Several of those awards belonged to him. Yet not a single student at Lincoln Heights knew. After changing into his training uniform, Marcus stepped onto the mat. His movements were precise and controlled. Every step flowed naturally into the next. Every turn carried years of repetition. As the evening passed, the tension from school gradually faded. But when practice ended, Sensei Brooks handed him a familiar envelope. The same invitation to the National Karate Championship. You have until Friday to accept, he said. Marcus stared at the official seal. His chest tightened. Memories surfaced instantly. Crowded arenas. Bright lights. His father cheering from the front row before illness took him away 3 years earlier. Since then, Marcus had avoided competition whenever possible. Not because he lacked ability, because every victory reminded him of someone who was no longer there to witness it. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside his bag. Outside, the sky had turned deep orange as the sun sank below the horizon. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a moment, unaware that across town, Ethan Walker was already planning something that would make the next day far more difficult than the last. The next morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds, and Lincoln Heights High School buzzed with its usual energy. Students crowded the hallways carrying coffee cups, sports bags, and unfinished homework. Marcus Johnson stepped through the front entrance just before the first bell, hoping to reach his locker unnoticed. That hope lasted less than 30 seconds. As he turned the corner toward the science wing, he noticed several students staring at their phones. Some glanced at him, whispered something to their friends, then looked away. Others did not even try to hide their amusement. A strange feeling settled in his stomach. By the time he reached his locker, he understood why. A video from the previous day had spread across social media overnight. Someone had recorded the scene in the hallway. The clip showed Ethan Walker making jokes while Marcus stood silently holding his books. The comments beneath the video were even worse. Hundreds of students had already seen it. Some mocked him. Others turned him into a meme. The nickname everyone used suddenly appeared everywhere. Marcus stared at the screen for a few seconds before locking his phone and sliding it into his pocket. He had spent years learning that attention could disappear if you refused to feed it. Unfortunately, Ethan seemed determined to make sure it did not. During second period, whispers followed Marcus into class. During lunch, students glanced at him and laughed before looking away. Even some teachers appeared aware that something had happened, though none addressed it directly. Across the cafeteria, Ethan sat at his usual table, surrounded by teammates. Every few minutes, another student stopped to talk to him. Ethan looked relaxed, confident, completely comfortable being the center of attention. Marcus focused on his lunch and ignored the noise around him. Then something unexpected happened. Near the far end of the cafeteria, a freshman accidentally dropped a tray. Food scattered across the floor. A few students laughed. Most ignored it. Marcus recognized the boy immediately. His name was Caleb Reed, a quiet 14-year-old who often spent afternoons in the library. Before Caleb could gather his things, 2 older students began making jokes at his expense. The freshman lowered his head, clearly wishing he could disappear. Marcus felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest. The scene reminded him too much of himself. Too much of the countless moments when people chose entertainment over kindness. Across the room, Ethan noticed the situation and grinned as if it were part of the day's amusement. Several students laughed louder. Caleb's face turned red. For a moment, Marcus stayed seated. He could hear his father's voice somewhere in his memory, steady and calm. Strength is not about proving what you can do. It is about deciding who you protect. Marcus slowly stood. Conversations nearby faded as he walked across the cafeteria. Caleb was still kneeling, trying to collect his belongings. Marcus bent down, picked up a notebook, and handed it back to him. Then he looked directly at the older students. "Leave him alone," he said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried across the sudden silence. Several heads turned. Ethan stopped smiling. For the first time all week, Marcus Johnson had stepped out of the role everyone expected him to play. And somewhere behind Ethan's confident expression, Curiosity began replacing certainty. The silence in the cafeteria did not last long. Within seconds, conversations restarted in hushed voices, but the atmosphere had changed. Caleb Reed slowly stood and clutched his notebook against his chest. His eyes were filled with surprise. Most students walked past uncomfortable moments. Very few stepped into them. Marcus handed him the last of his papers and gave a small nod before turning back toward his table. He intended to leave it there. Unfortunately, Ethan Walker had other plans. "Look at that," Ethan called out from across the room. The professor finally found his voice. A few students laughed nervously. Others watched carefully, sensing that something different was happening. Marcus kept walking. He had spent years refusing invitations to conflict. But Ethan stood up from his chair and followed several steps. Behind. "You think you are some kind of hero now?" Ethan asked. The cafeteria grew quieter again. Marcus stopped and faced him. His expression remained calm. "No," he answered. "I just think everyone deserves respect." The response caught several students off guard. There was no anger in his voice. No attempt to impress anyone. Just a simple statement. Ethan folded his arms. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed. He had expected an argument. Instead, he received something much harder to challenge. Around them, phones slowly appeared again. Students sensed a story developing. By the end of the day, that story had spread through every hallway in Lincoln Heights High School. Some students claimed Marcus had finally stood up for himself. Others insisted he was trying to gain attention. The rumors changed with every retelling. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on finishing classes and avoiding the growing noise surrounding his name. But the attention refused to disappear. During 7th period, a message appeared in a group chat used by hundreds of students. The sender was anonymous. The message was simple. "Friday. After school. Football field. Let us see if the genius can back up his confidence." Screenshots spread immediately. By the time the final bell rang, almost everyone had seen it. Marcus learned about the message only when his friend Olivia Carter approached him outside chemistry class. Olivia had known him since middle school and understood him better than most people did. "Please tell me you are not going," she said quietly. Marcus looked confused. She showed him the screen. His stomach tightened. "I did not post that," he replied. "I know," Olivia said. "But everyone thinks this is about you." Outside the classroom windows, dark clouds drifted across the late afternoon sky. Students moved through the parking lot below like streams of water. Marcus stared at the message for several seconds before handing the phone back. He knew exactly where the challenge had come from. What he did not know was how quickly it was spreading. Across campus, Ethan sat in the locker room surrounded by teammates discussing the same rumor. A confident smile crossed his face as he listened. To him, the situation felt like a game. To Marcus, it felt like a test he never wanted. Yet as he walked toward the parking lot, another image entered his mind. Caleb kneeling in the cafeteria, embarrassed, alone. The memory stayed with him all the way home. And for the first time in years, Marcus began wondering whether staying silent was still the right choice. Thursday arrived with a strange tension hanging over Lincoln Heights High School. The rumor that had started as a simple message had grown into something much larger. Students discussed it between classes. Screens lit up with new comments every hour. By lunchtime, some students were already talking about Friday afternoon as if it were a major event. Marcus Johnson hated every minute of it. He sat alone beneath a maple tree near the edge of campus, trying to focus on a physics assignment. The pages remained open, but his attention drifted elsewhere. Every time he looked up, he caught someone glancing in his direction. Some appeared curious. Others seemed amused. A few looked disappointed that he was not reacting the way they expected. Across campus, Ethan Walker appeared to enjoy the attention. His confidence seemed to grow with every passing hour. Students gathered around him in the hallways, asking questions, repeating rumors, and adding new details that were not even true. By the end of the day, half the school believed Marcus had challenged Ethan directly. The other half believed Ethan was preparing to embarrass Marcus in front of everyone. Neither version reflected reality. Marcus had never challenged anyone. He simply wanted to be left alone. During his final class of the afternoon, his phone vibrated several times. When the bell finally rang, he checked the screen. New messages filled his inbox. Most came from students he barely knew. Some encouraged him to stay away from the football field. Others warned him that Ethan was planning something public. One message stood out. It came from Caleb Reed. Thank you for helping me. Most people would not have done that. Marcus read the message twice before slipping the phone back into his pocket. As he walked toward the parking lot, he noticed Ethan standing near the entrance surrounded by several teammates. Their eyes met briefly. Ethan smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who believed he already knew how the story would end. Marcus looked away and continued walking. That evening, rain tapped softly against the windows of his house. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city. Marcus sat at the kitchen table finishing homework while his mother prepared dinner. Denise Johnson noticed the distraction immediately. She had spent years recognizing the difference between concentration and worry. Something happened at school, she said gently. Marcus hesitated before nodding. He explained everything. The video, the rumors, the attention he never wanted. Denise listened without interrupting. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father used to say that character reveals itself when everyone is watching, she said. The words lingered in the room long after she returned to cooking. Later that night, Marcus opened the old wooden box stored in his closet. Inside rested photographs, medals, and memories he rarely touched. At the bottom lay the National Karate Championship invitation. Beside it was a picture of his father standing proudly next to him after a tournament years earlier. Marcus stared at the image for several minutes. The smile on his father's face carried the same lesson he had repeated countless times. Real strength is not about proving people wrong. It is about doing what is right even when nobody expects it. Outside, the rain continued falling against the glass. Inside, Marcus made a quiet decision. Whatever happened on Friday, he would not run from it. And for the first time since the rumors began, he felt completely calm. Friday arrived beneath a pale autumn sky, and from the moment Marcus Johnson stepped onto campus, he could feel the difference. Conversations seemed to pause when he passed. Students checked their phones more often than usual. Even teachers appeared aware that something was building beneath the surface. Yet Marcus moved through the day with unexpected calm. The decision he had made the night before had settled deep inside him like an anchor. He no longer worried about rumors. He no longer worried about what people expected. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt clear. Classes passed slowly. The ticking of classroom clocks sounded louder than usual. Outside the windows, sunlight broke through the clouds in soft golden streaks that stretched across the football field. By lunchtime, groups of students had already begun discussing where they planned to stand after school. The anticipation seemed to spread through the building like electricity. Marcus ignored it. Instead, he spent his lunch period in the library, sitting near a tall window overlooking the courtyard. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. Dust floated through beams of sunlight. It was the kind of quiet place where thoughts could finally breathe. He opened a physics textbook, but found himself staring beyond the pages. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass. Not the version of himself everyone at school thought they knew. The real version. The boy who had spent years training before sunrise. The son who still carried lessons from a father he missed every day. The student who understood that strength meant far more than winning. A few minutes later, a familiar voice interrupted the silence. Olivia Carter lowered herself into the chair across from him. She studied his face carefully. You seem different today, she said. Marcus smiled slightly. Maybe I am. Olivia glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. People are expecting something after school. Marcus looked back toward the sunlight beyond the window. People expect a lot of things. For several seconds, neither spoke. The library remained still except for the occasional turning of a page somewhere among the shelves. Finally, Olivia nodded. Whatever happens, do not forget who you are. The words stayed with him long after she left. When the final bell rang later that afternoon, students flooded into the hallways. Excited voices echoed against rows of lockers. Shoes squeaked across polished floors. Doors opened and closed. But Marcus moved at his own pace. Instead of heading directly outside, he stopped by his locker and removed a small photograph from his backpack. It showed him and his father standing together after a tournament many years earlier. Both were smiling. Both looked proud. Marcus ran his thumb gently across the worn edge of the picture. Then he slipped it back into his pocket. Outside, the air felt cool and fresh after the previous night's rain. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk as students gathered near the football field. In the distance, the crowd continued growing. But Marcus did not hurry. He stood for a moment beneath the fading afternoon light and took a slow breath. The wind moved softly through the trees above him. Somewhere beyond the noise and expectations, he could almost hear his father's voice again. And with that quiet reminder, Marcus began walking toward whatever waited ahead. By the time Marcus Johnson reached the football field, the crowd had grown far larger than he expected. Students lined the bleachers, gathered along the fence, and stood in clusters across the grass. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. Voices filled the air, blending into a restless hum of anticipation. At the center of it all stood Ethan Walker. Confident, relaxed, certain. The moment Marcus appeared, dozens of heads turned in his direction. Conversations faded. Phones rose into the air. Ethan smiled as Marcus approached. "I was starting to think you were not coming," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Marcus stopped several feet away. His posture remained calm. "I am here." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Some students had expected him to avoid the situation entirely. Others expected him to arrive angry. Instead, he looked composed, almost unaffected by the attention surrounding him. Ethan folded his arms. "You know, this whole week has been interesting. Everybody keeps acting like there is something special about you." Several students laughed. Marcus said nothing. The silence seemed to frustrate Ethan more than any argument could have. "Maybe today, everyone finally finds out who you really are." For a moment, neither moved. A cool breeze swept across the field, rustling jackets and carrying loose leaves across the track. Then a new voice suddenly interrupted the tension. "Marcus." The crowd turned. Standing near the entrance gate was a tall man, wearing a navy blazer embroidered with a gold crest. Beside him stood two other adults carrying clipboards and equipment cases. Marcus immediately recognized them. So did several students who had participated in regional sports competitions. The man stepped forward with a puzzled expression. "We have been trying to reach you all afternoon." The crowd grew quiet. Ethan looked confused. Marcus blinked. "Mr. Reynolds?" The man smiled. "You received the invitation, correct? We were concerned because registration for the National Karate Championship closes tonight." Complete silence fell over the field. Several students exchanged shocked looks. Ethan's confident expression disappeared instantly. Mr. Reynolds continued speaking, completely unaware of the effect his words were having. "Honestly, everyone is excited to see you return. Not many former state champions qualify for nationals at your age." A phone slipped from someone's hand and landed softly in the grass. Another student whispered, "State champion?" The words spread through the crowd like a wave. State champion. National qualifier. Karate. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly. The secret he had hidden for years now stood exposed beneath the afternoon sun. Mr. Reynolds opened a folder and handed Marcus several documents. "Your record still stands in 2 divisions, he said proudly. "That is why the committee wanted to meet with you personally." Around them, students stared in disbelief. Olivia covered her mouth. Caleb looked as though he had forgotten how to blink. Ethan stood frozen. Every assumption he had made about Marcus suddenly collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. The quiet student everyone underestimated was not weak. He was not afraid. He had simply chosen restraint. And in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of stunned classmates, Marcus Johnson did not look like the boy they thought they knew. He looked exactly like the champion he had been all along. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The football field that had been filled with whispers, laughter, and anticipation now stood beneath a blanket of stunned silence. Students stared at Marcus Johnson as though they were seeing him for the first time. The labels they had attached to him over the years no longer fit. The quiet kid, the nerd, the easy target. Those assumptions seemed to dissolve in the cool afternoon air. Mr. Reynolds continued discussing registration details, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just swept through Lincoln Heights High School. Marcus listened politely, signed the necessary paperwork, and thanked him for making the trip. Then the officials gathered their materials and slowly walked back toward the parking lot. As they disappeared beyond the gate, the silence remained. Hundreds of students still watched. Ethan Walker stood motionless near the center of the crowd. The confidence that had carried him through the week was gone. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not because Marcus had threatened him. Not because anyone had embarrassed him. The truth itself had done all the work. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the grass. Memories from the past few weeks replayed in his mind. The jokes, the comments, the assumptions, the certainty that he had understood someone he had never actually taken the time to know. Around him, several teammates shifted uncomfortably. Nobody seemed sure what to say. Finally, Ethan took a slow step forward. Then another. The crowd parted instinctively as he approached Marcus. Phones remained raised, but nobody spoke. Marcus turned to face him. His expression stayed calm, exactly as it had been all week. Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. The words seemed difficult to find. "I did not know," he said quietly. It was the first honest thing he had said all afternoon. Marcus nodded. "I know." Ethan looked away for a moment before meeting his eyes again. "I was wrong about you." The statement carried across the silent field. Some students appeared shocked. Others looked relieved. Ethan swallowed hard. "Actually, I was wrong about a lot of things." Marcus studied him for a moment. He could have enjoyed the victory. He could have reminded everyone how they treated him. He could have made Ethan feel exactly the way he had felt all week. Instead, he remembered something his father once told him after a tournament. The strongest people do not win by humiliating others. They win by remaining themselves. Marcus extended his hand. The gesture surprised nearly everyone watching. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. Then slowly, he accepted it. A collective breath seemed to pass through the crowd. Not because of who won, not because of who lost, but because everyone had expected anger and received grace instead. Caleb Reed smiled from the edge of the gathering. Olivia Carter wiped away a tear she had not realized was there. The tension that had consumed the school for days finally began to fade. As students started leaving the field, conversations sounded different than before. There was less gossip, less laughter at someone else's expense, more reflection, more respect. And standing beneath the fading sunlight, Marcus Johnson proved something far more important than strength. He showed everyone that character is revealed not when you gain power over someone, but when you choose what to do with it. Monday morning arrived beneath a bright blue sky, and Lincoln Heights High School felt different. The building was the same. The hallways were the same. The lockers still slammed shut between classes. But something invisible had changed. Students no longer looked at Marcus Johnson with amusement or curiosity. They looked at him with respect. As he walked through the front entrance carrying the same backpack and the same stack of books, conversations continued normally. Nobody whispered. Nobody laughed. Several students even nodded hello as he passed. Marcus returned each greeting with a small smile before continuing toward his locker. The attention that had once made him uncomfortable had faded into something quieter and more genuine. Later that morning, he found a folded note resting inside his locker. There was no signature on the front. Inside, only a few words were written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for helping, Caleb. Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." Marcus read the note once, then folded it carefully and placed it inside his backpack beside the photograph of his father. During lunch, Caleb Reed joined him at a table near the window. It was the first time all year the younger student had chosen to sit with anyone. They talked about classes, robotics, and college plans. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just two students sharing a meal. Across the cafeteria, Ethan Walker sat with his teammates. Their eyes met briefly. Ethan stood, walked across the room, and stopped beside the table. Several nearby conversations immediately quieted. Ethan looked at Marcus, then at Caleb. "Mind if I sit down for a minute?" he asked. Marcus nodded toward the empty chair. Ethan sat and exhaled slowly. "I signed up to volunteer with the freshman mentoring program this morning," he said. Caleb looked surprised. Marcus simply listened. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Figured it was time I started acting like a leader instead of just talking about it." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Caleb smiled. Marcus smiled too. Outside the cafeteria windows, sunlight shimmered across the football field where everything had changed only days earlier. Yet the most important change had happened inside people, not around them. That afternoon, after school ended, Marcus drove with his mother to the regional training center to complete his championship registration. As they pulled into the parking lot, the setting sun painted the horizon with shades of orange and gold. Denise Johnson looked at her son and smiled. "Your father would be proud of you." Marcus looked out the window for a moment before answering. "I hope so." Inside the building, coaches and competitors moved through the lobby preparing for the season ahead. New challenges waited. New opportunities waited. Life continued moving forward. Hours later, as evening settled over the city, Marcus stood outside the training center alone. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The championship invitation rested safely inside his bag. Above him, the first stars appeared against the darkening sky. He thought about the week, the rumors, the misunderstandings, the lessons. Then he thought about the future. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack and started walking toward the parking lot where his mother waited. The night air felt calm. The road ahead felt open. And beneath the quiet glow of the streetlights, the son of a good man carried something far more valuable than a trophy. He carried character. And that was the kind of strength that never fades.